Hi, I'm Chas, and you're watching Chas's Crazy Creations. When I go to the grocery store, I like to use a recycled bag. And one of the other things I love to do with these is use them as gift bags, because then a person gets something they can use again and again for anything they want, whether it's a grocery bag, a beach bag, just to carry extra things to sporting events for their kids. Whatever it is, it's a reusable thing that's not going to be thrown away. Next, we're going to be giving it a little facelift, and I'll be using this stencil. And both of these items I found at Dollar Tree. Now you're going to start by placing your stencil onto the bag where you want it to go. And you have a few options. When you pick out a stencil, you can buy some that have an adhesive on the back, and all you have to do is peel and stick it onto the bag. You can also buy a spray adhesive and then place it on that, which will keep it into place. Or you can use a liquid stencil adhesive that you put on the back of the stencil and hold it. This is nice for bleeding. It stops the paint from going underneath. Another way to adhere it is with some stencil tape, which is what I'll be using today. So one of the reasons I love stencil tape is, as you can see here, this gets really close, the stencil to the edge. And so when you're stenciling, you don't want it to bleed over. So by putting some stencil tape on, even if it is a self-adhesive stencil, it just gives you a little extra margin so that when you're stenciling, it doesn't go outside of the area you want it to go in. So I'll finish taping this up and we'll get started. So another thing you're going to want to do is put something between the bag to stop the paint from going through. And you can use a piece of cardboard, or I like to use wax paper, and you just slide it in between the front and the back of the bag. Today I'm using Folk Art Home Decor Chalk Paint in the color Sheepskin, and you could easily use fabric paint or acrylic paint. It depends upon if you want to be able to wash it or not. So make sure you check the back to see what surfaces it's safe for. I'm going to be using my stencil brush for this project, but you could use a sponge stencil brush or regular paintbrush. It's kind of your choice, whichever one works best for you. So I like to use a paper plate, and I'll show you how this works. Now you can either choose to put some of the paint on the paper plate, dip out of the jar, use the lid. It's just kind of a personal preference, and I change it up depending upon what kind of paint I'm using. Now I've loaded my paintbrush with paint, but the key to stenciling is the offloading technique. So you dip it in, get it kind of coated, and we'll talk about what happens next. Now the next thing you want to do is called offloading, where you get as much paint off the brush as possible, because with all this extra under here, this is what bleeds underneath the stencil, and you don't want that. So you kind of almost get everything back off your brush. So next you start tapping your paintbrush up and down onto the stencil. And this stops the bleeding from going underneath. So the up and down rather than this motion, which would make it go underneath. So just tapping and tapping, and then you add more paint if you need to, and keep going. So I'm gonna keep going with this. And you can start with a light coat, which is better. You can let it dry and then see if it needs a second coat, or go back and forth. But the most important thing is not to do too much paint at once, or that's the bleeding that happens. So I'll go ahead and keep going and show you what it looks like. So I'm just finishing it up here, and we're about ready to peel up the stencil. And one of the great things about fabric is it's a little more absorbing. So sometimes it's a little easier and less bleeding than when you stencil onto other surfaces. So we're gonna go ahead now and peel the stencil up, and it's important to peel it right away and be careful with it, because sometimes when you're on other surfaces, the paint and the stencil can become one. So if you don't pull it up while it's wet, sometimes when you pull the stencil up, it will pull the paint with it. That isn't always true of fabric, but it can be true of other surfaces. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this dry completely, and I'm gonna leave the wax paper in there until it's dry. And in the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and wash my stencil. Because it's a vinyl stencil, I'll be able to clean it up and use it again another time. I hope this inspires you to make an eco-friendly grocery bag and produce bag. I'd love it if you'd follow me on my blog at chascrazycreations.com and on my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.